He squeezed her wrinkled hand and draped a blanket over her shoulders. "I can do it myself," she grumbled playfully, gazing at the sun setting over the river. "You always say that." He smiled warmly and kissed her right temple. She glanced at him joyfully before turning her eyes back to the river. "Remember that Sunday when we met for the first time after—" He paused, but quickly continued. "I put the blanket over your shoulders, and you grumbled as usual, but then later that evening you did the same for me?" "Sunday? Which Sunday?" She looked confused. 40 years ago, when you told me—" He stopped again, sorrow covering his face for a split second, but quickly regained composure, his smile returning. 40 years ago. She repeated in disbelief, gazing blankly out in front of her, as if unable to comprehend the number. His hand was cold as always, but his eyes looked at her with just as much warmth as when they were young. She squeezed his hand tightly for several seconds. "Was it that long ago?" He kissed her on the forehead without answering. She chuckled and looked him in the eye. "I remember. The red blanket. You said red doesn't suit you. It still doesn't." She laughed. "Is it how you expected it would be?" He looked genuinely interested. "What?" "Us?" He turned his head to watch the waves on the river. "No," she paused. "It's not, really, it's—" She paused again, as if in disbelief of what she was about to say. "It's better." The breeze from the river shuffled his coal-black hair, showcasing the large white sections. Each white hair represented a time she had hurt him. Her eyes teared up, and she squeezed his hand even harder. "I'm so sorry." "For what?" He laughed lightheartedly. But she knew he understood. He never showed her what he had to go through. He took the blows and stayed with her. Every single time. She looked back at the sunset, trying not to cry. "Why are you here?" she whispered. "I'll always be here, silly." His eyes sparkled with cheerfulness and care. She turned to him and tried to squeeze his hand again in gratitude for all these years, but now his hand felt soft, like dough. She gasped, her eyes widening. She squeezed his hand again, but it disappeared into thin air. She couldn't breathe. It was as if her chest was tied with ropes. She started to panic. "Stay," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Stay." She tried to put her hand on his chest, but it passed right through him, as if he was a reflection on the water. She tried to touch his face with the same result. Her heart stopped. "Stay. Please stay," she whimpered, and closed her eyes. Nothingness. Emptiness. Silence. She opened her eyes and looked at his disappearing image. His warmth still on her skin. Where he had been sitting, there was now a letter. She picked it up with old, trembling hands and read the only word written in his handwriting. Why?